Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're starting a brand new book. Well, I guess it's not brand new. We're starting a brand new series through an Old Testament book of...
It's only a couple thousand years old.
It's only a couple
Nehemiah.
Let's do Nehemiah. There we go. Nehemiah.
Yeah.
Fun fact. Out of the 39 books of the Old Testament, only 11 of them are actually carry the chronology of the Old Testament story.
Okay.
And Nehemiah is the last one.
Right.
All right. The actual Old Testament story ends with Nehemiah. Now, Malachi is the last prophet, but he's prophesying around the time of Nehemiah. So we're really
so they're right there.
Yeah. We're coming. This is. I mean, if we're reading through the Old Testament, it's like Nehemiah's only halfway through. What are we talking about? But the actual chronology, starting with Genesis, going through the end of the story of the Old Testament, actually ends with Nehemiah.
Yeah. So to get everybody on the same page, I know that we spend an awful lot of time in First and Second Kings, if you remember those, Chronicles. First and Second Chronicles, which is basically the same as First and Second Kings. They're very close to each other,
right, yeah.
but it tells the story, right? And like you were talking about the historical story. So we're talking about Saul as being the first king, and then David, and then Solomon, and then this whole series of kings that were either terrible, almost terrible, and almost good, and then the nation of Israel splitting into two, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and then finally the northern kingdom getting taken away, Assyria. Mm-hmm. And then the southern kingdom, which is where Jerusalem was, finally also gets taken away by Babylon. Right. And is this where we get no stone left unturned?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, because supposedly, right, Babylon came in and wiped them out.
Yeah.
Like either killed everybody, took people back to Babylon, and also knocked down all the walls.
Yeah, the walls around Jerusalem and the temple.
Right.
Stripped the temple of all the precious metals,
everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the way it was left, and so now we have these captives that we follow to Babylon, and that's where we get the story of Daniel during this time.
Yep.
And now there has been a couple sets of groups of people that have gone back to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the first questions is, if I wipe you out and I take some people to Babylon, why would they let them go back to Jerusalem in the first place?
Yeah, well, because in the meantime, now Babylon's been overtaken.
Yep.
So Babylon was the first major world empires, Egypt, back in Moses' day. And then we've got Assyria, which is sort of during the Kings and Chronicles.
Right.
And then Babylon overthrew Egypt and Assyria. Okay. And so those 10 tribes that were taken captive into Assyria have now been assimilated into Babylon overall. Right. And then, and like you said, Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, that's their day. Then in the year 539, about 70 years after Daniel was taken into captivity, Persia
becomes the powerhouse.
Overthrows Babylon. And the king of Persia is Cyrus.
Right.
And 200 years earlier, Isaiah had actually prophesied Cyrus by name as being whom God would use to start the return of...
How awesome is that?
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah. Right. So now Persia is in charge.
Right.
Daniel is almost dead. Okay,
Right.
He was still alive when Persia took over. That's in Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar's handwriting on the wall. That was the night that Persia defeated Babylon.
Yeah.
Daniel dies shortly thereafter, and now under the rule of Persia, Persia is going to be overthrown by Greece, Alexander the Great, eventually. But under Persia, now we have the first major return back to Israel under Zerubbabel.
Right.
And that's in the early first half of Ezra. Then the second half of Ezra, we have Ezra brings a group back. And then Nehemiah brings a group back, and
Right.
during the first, or in between the first and second half of Ezra is about 80 years, 70 or so years, and that's when Esther happens. So Esther and Mordecai in the land of Persia.
Right.
So all of that's happening now at the same time.
Right. So, do y'all catch all that? Catch all that? 'Cause that will be on the test.
That'll be on the quiz.
But the big idea is Zerubbabel took a group of people back and rebuilt the temple, and then they were kind of done. It seemed like they were done.
Yeah.
80, 90 years later, Ezra took another group back, and Ezra, what did they do?
Well, they were rebuilding the temple because the one from Zerubbabel's day had started to
Already deteriorate. Right.
By the way, Zerubbabel's day is, since we're making connections, Haggai, Zechariah are prophesying during Zerubbabel's day. Then we've got about 60, 70 years to Ezra, and then another dozen years or so to Nehemiah. And Ezra really, the book of Ezra really focuses on the temple side of things and this spiritual restoration of bringing Israel back and worship, and let's get the temple going and the temple sacrifices and the true worship.
Right. So then you have Nehemiah. He comes back and he has a completely different focus.
Yeah.
Right. And his focus is, we got to make this place safe.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see throughout this book how well of a planner he is. And he was actually a governor in Persia, right?
Well, he ends up he was the cupbearer
Persian
to the king.
province of Judah.
Yeah, he ended up being the governor of Israel.
Okay.
Under Persia's umbrella.
Okay. Oh, right. Sorry. And he starts out high up in the Persian court, right?
Right. Yeah. So he's the cupbearer to the king.
Right.
Which is really cool because we saw cupbearer all the way back in Genesis, with Joseph and that. So.
Right.
Now, fun thing about two points about the Persian law, and we see this in Esther, is that number one, once a law is written under the Persian law code, it can't be changed. It is law, the king has signed it, whatever, it can't be changed, which means the only way to change it would be to write another law, which would go against that law or supersede it, but it can't supersede it. So you have to, so that's why we see in Ezra, you can do this. Okay, but you can do this. So it sort of wipes each other out, but it's not, you can't just strike a law.
Right.
The second thing is Persian kings, apparently, and we see this in both we see this in both Nehemiah and Esther, Persian kings apparently required you to be happy, or at least stoic in their presence. Right. You were not allowed to be sad in the presence of the king. You could literally die.
Yeah, Esther was that way.
Esther was the same way.
I forgot about that. Right. So and we're jumping all around here, which is fine.
We're setting the scene, right?
Because Nehemiah is in presence of the king and he is feeling down, and immediately it's, hey,
what's wrong?
What's wrong? Right.
But I love the fact because, he trusts King Artaxerxes now. Trusts Nehemiah so much. He served him I don't know how long, but he trusts him, and so when Nehemiah comes in looking sad, the first response is not off with his head. It's like, hey, what's wrong?
Yeah, true.
True.
And
so what was wrong?
He had gotten a message from his relatives that things weren't well in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right? So, and if you think about it, Jerusalem got wiped out, but Zerubbabel went back 80 years later, now Israel went back, and you would think the temple would be rebuilt, commerce would be starting,
right?
And that wasn't the case at all.
No, the walls were still destroyed.
Right.
Wild animals, marauders were going through. It was not a safe place to be.
Right.
And so you got the temple that's supposed to be the worship of God, and nobody's living there, and nobody wants to live there.
Right. So the question is, what do we do about it, right? So he's like, well, let me take a group of people back, and so
he goes to the king, right? And the king says, what's wrong? So he tells him this whole thing, right? And then he asks. So the king says, well, what can I do, right? And I love that. because you can see God at work in there. And there's a ton of prayer. We'll come to this, and when we talk about some
and it's also, but it does point out how well of a planner Nehemiah is, because he had pre-thought all this out
for 3 months. For 3 months, he planned his speech.
Right.
He knows I'm going to go into the king and look sad.
And I get one chance, and I have to word it right, and I have to pick my day.
Yeah.
And I need to pray to God.
But he prayed for 3 months, and he planned for 3 months.
Yeah.
And then he goes into the king, and what can I do? And so he makes the ask.
Right. All right, so quick question for you. So that's not going to be a quick question. In most of the books of the Bible, there is scripture that we quote. There are heroic things that happen. This is very detailed of a guy that certainly goes back to his homeland with a plan to rebuild some walls and to get the commerce going. Not very heroic.
Yeah.
Not very spiritual. I mean, there's certainly prayer in here. Yeah. So what are we supposed to get out of this?
I think there's a ton of stuff, actually. You're right. It's not one of the quotable books necessarily. Right. Although one of my favorite. It's not this week. It's I think it's next week's reading. But there's some enemies. There's some detractors that are constantly Sanballat and Tobiah. I mean, their names just
they're bad guys.
They're bad guys, right? And they're doing everything they can. They're Gentiles. They're from the surrounding area. They do not want to see a thriving Jerusalem.
Right.
Okay. And so they're doing everything they can. And one of my favorite quotes, just generally, is and we're going to talk about this next time, so I don't want to steal the thunder. But he says to them, they try to set up a meeting with him, and he says to them, "I'm doing an important work, and I don't have time to come down and see you." I'm like, go Nehemiah. Well done. Well, from this week, he does the ask of the king. Can I go back? Can I take some people back? And by the way, can I go through your forests and your mines and whatever? And can I take whatever I need?
Yeah.
Supplies. And the king says, "Here, let me write letters so that they know that you can take anything that you need."
Yeah, how awesome is that?
Which is very cool.
Yeah. So now he has the supplies. Now he has the manpower, and they make the trip back.
They make the trip. They go back there, and he spends 3 days just meeting with people, not telling them why he's there.
Yeah. So in the reading, he goes off by himself at night.
One night later, about 3 days later, he goes off by himself.
He just kind of wants to survey the gates.
Yep.
It seems like.
Yep.
And how bad is it?
Yep.
So how big is Jerusalem at that time?
Yeah, it's I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the measurement. Yeah.
The number of gates?
Yeah, there was like 13, there were 11 or 12 or 13 gates that are mentioned in chapter 3, which is really cool because chapter 3 starts with the sheep gate, and then it lists names of gates and people, and it ends with the sheep gate.
Well, and it seems to...
It goes all the way around, and so it shows the plan. You asked, what do we get from this?
Yeah.
So many practical management skills.
Right.
If you're a manager and you manage people, you manage projects, you should read Nehemiah.
Yeah, huge project, and the order that he went in too, right? He surveyed things. He got the people excited before they even got started.
Yep.
Certainly there's a number of problems that will hit. But I think one of the coolest things he did was they didn't necessarily start at the first gate and everybody was on the first gate.
Right.
And let's just build this first gate.
This. Right.
What it was, hey, why don't you all build the gate that's right next to your house?
Right, yeah, opposite from you.
I mean, your commute's less, and you're making your own house and area and friends and family safe.
Right. Well, he got their ownership. They bought into it, and there are a ton of practical, just practical management lessons.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I like about this is that balance. He doesn't just, you know, let go and let God, you know, do his work, but he also doesn't say, it's all up to me. You know, he spends time planning, but also praying. And I love the fact in chapter 2, so he spent 3 months planning and praying, and then when he finally goes into the king and the king says, hey, what's wrong? Nehemiah says, so I sent up a quick prayer and then I got right into it. Just
there it is. God is right what I asked for.
Yeah, just the little mentions like that in there. I like
but that's the humanity part of it, right?
Yeah.
Because we've all done that where you're, you know, you finally get in front of somebody, it's finally what you've hoped for. Wait.
He kept his cards close to his chest, right? So that's where he said, where you know, for 3 days he got there. He just talked with people. He met with people. Did not tell them what he was there to do. He didn't know who he could trust. Right. He didn't know who was going to be on his inner team. Who was going to be. So you know, a wise man doesn't tell everything he knows.
Yeah.
You know, and I think he shows a lot of wisdom in addition to practical management skills. And then he didn't let his detractors steal his attention. They were constantly trying to get his attention, get him off focus. But he didn't ignore them either. He always had one. He knew where they were. He knew what they were doing, but he wasn't going to spend all of his time there. He had work to do, but he never took his eye off of the people who were trying to take him down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point.
So it doesn't sound spiritual. It doesn't sound biblical, like you said. It doesn't sound, but I mean, very practical and relevant for, you know, anybody today.
And like you said, still in management. Yeah, relevant for that.
Yeah. Anybody who's in any kind of management should read Nehemiah at least once, if not once a year, just from a leadership perspective.
All right.
Right.
Is there more we need to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that really sets up the first 3 chapters. There will be a spiritual component later as he gets into it, but right now he has to focus on the task at hand. He has to focus on the work. Right. I think I like something I think that you had said, where he's not doing the work himself. He's managing the people. He's letting the people do the work, you know, their ownership. And
but he did, you know, here's the vision, here's the plan, and the people were, you know, he got the people excited.
Yeah, and it's not that he didn't do work, but he didn't take it all on himself. This wasn't his project. He didn't micromanage it. I mean, just a ton of. I mean, you're not going to see the word micromanage in Nehemiah, but you know, you can see that in today's society. So, I mean, there are a lot of good practical principles. I hope that you find this is a practical book. You know, very, very relevant practical book. It's 13 chapters, so we're actually going to spend 4 weeks in it, and
can take our time with it. Yeah,
take our time a little bit with it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so enjoy it. Enjoy the reading. Enjoy it. Look at it. You know, maybe as a leadership book, and just read it that way. Chuck Swindoll has a great little commentary or workbook on Nehemiah called "Hand Me Another Brick."
Nice.
And it's really from a leadership principle. So if that's the type of thing that you're interested in, I'd highly recommend that you look up that book. Next week we'll see some more opposition, and they'll finish the project, which is really cool.
Already?
Week 2. Week 2, yeah. So until then, share this with your friends and family, with people that you think, if you know people who are in management, they may find this very helpful as well, and you pass that along to them. Your questions and comments are always welcome, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.